All right. I'll wait for the clock to turn over exactly 6 p.m. to make this official. But I wanted you all to have a moment to make sure that you can see the stream as we get started. And I sit here watching the computer clock. Welcome to VidZette, your home for careful consideration of our common concerns. I'm Dr. Ted Noel. As we look at getting this broadcast going on a regular basis, I'm discovering a thing or two. We had to have our house repiped, which, as you can imagine, is a big job, and it messed up Tuesday night. I'm also going on a vacation in a couple of weeks. And so, as we look at all of this stuff, it appears that Thursday nights at around 7 p.m. Eastern, that's an hour later than tonight, actually are probably a better time. It also works out for where I'm going on the West Coast. Now, as for the format, what I'm going to try to do is have several sections, each with a single subject. And then as you guys write in on your comments, I will see things that we want to add at the back end. So here we go. Our first subject tonight is Brett Kavanaugh. Now, most of us are reasonably familiar with who he is, that he spent 12 years as a judge on the D.C. Court of Appeals. He has written over 300 opinions and has a very long paper trail. Now, Brett Kavanaugh describes himself as a servant of the law. Now, when you look at that term, you say, okay, wait a minute, what is the law? And that's a very real concern, because if I look at the law, I go, I have to understand what the law says in order to do things that are within the law. And that means a couple of things. First, it means that you have no laws out there that are hiding just there to bite you so that the bureaucrats can make you do what they want. It has to be understandable. But second, it can't change from year to year. So when I look at our Constitution, I have to say that the words in that document, as understood by the people who wrote it, have to be the key in our understanding of what's going on with the law. That is, the law is the language that was recorded as understood by the people who wrote it. Now, on the other side, we have a theory called the living constitution. And this has been percolating along for around a century. And the basic idea is that we have to understand the Constitution in a way different from what it was understood in the past. For example, the gun control argument. The only guns they had then were muskets. Now we have automatic and semi-automatic weapons. And obviously, the guys back then couldn't possibly have written anything that fits here. And so we have to change it to meet the circumstances. Well, same thing could be argued for freedom of the press. And the freedom of the press basically says that the government makes no law restricting what you say in print. You know, obviously there is a restriction for libel and slander, but this has to change because now we have electronic communication, just like what you and I are doing right now. So when we look at this, the living constitutionalists sit there and go, we have to change it. We have to completely understand it differently. Instead of saying, what is the principle? For freedom of the press, the principle was you can't shut somebody down because you don't like what they said. It doesn't matter whether they said it in print, in person, over the radio, on TV, on the internet. It doesn't matter. It's you can't shut them down because you don't like what they said. With firearms, it's, hey, muskets were in common use. Now AR-15s are in common use. Those are appropriate for civilian use. And that's part of what went on in the discussion with Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh has firmly put himself down on what is called the textualist side. That is, that whatever you understand from the text ought to agree with what the people who wrote it said. Now, if you don't like what it says, that doesn't give you the opportunity to say, oh, I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to go somewhere else. No. What it says is, if it's not the way you want things now, there is a procedure to change it. And you can either propose a constitutional amendment through the congressional or the Convention of States routes, one of those two routes. And the Constitution can only be changed on those routes. There is no variation. And so the problem you've got with the living Constitution is very simply that in the living Constitution approach, the law is constantly changing, and you can't know what the law means tomorrow. It may not mean the same thing it meant yesterday. But in the textualist approach, it says it means the same thing all the time. And if you want to change it, you have to change the law through the given processes in the Constitution. And that's what's really cool with Kavanaugh. One other thing that comes up, and I've heard it again and again in the hearings, is something called the Unitary Executive Theory. And what we've got, if I read Article 2, Section 1 of the United States Constitution, it says, quote, the executive power shall be vested in a president of the United States of America. Goes on to describe how he gets elected and how it can be removed. The executive power. In other words, the branch of government that he runs. It's not something where anybody has the opportunity to change who is running it, to say we have an independent agency. Now, we do have a Supreme Court decision that allowed an independent agency, and that may very well get overturned. But at the same time, this separation of powers is very straightforward. You have the legislative branch makes the laws. The president carries out the laws, and the judiciary deals with disputes related to the laws. That's how it's done. But what we have these days is a president who runs very remotely an impressive bureaucracy where the bureaucrats write laws, and those bureaucrats aren't answerable to anybody. Their regulations become law. They have the force of law. They can put you in jail. They can take your money. They can take your property. But the fact is that they are not the legislature. And what's happened over the past is something called Chevron deference. And that simply says that based on a case called Chevron, if a bureaucratic agency says, here's what the law means, we should presume that they are right. Where does the Constitution give them the right to say that? It doesn't. And so Chevron deference is one of the things that Kavanaugh has already written about extensively, that it's a problem. Gorsuch wrote about it as well. And we may see cases very shortly that clamp down on the regulatory state simply by saying you went beyond what Congress said you could do. And if you want to go there, Congress has to write the law for you to go there. So Kavanaugh should be an excellent choice. I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect choice, other than me, of course. But he's a very, very good choice. The Democrats haven't laid a glove on him. He will become our next justice of the Supreme Court, and it will be a good thing. Now, if only the notorious RBG would retire or die. I mean, I don't want her to die, but, that's one of the ways you get her to retire. We could get another real, honest judge on the court. All right, let's take just a moment. Our second subject today is the fruit of the poisonous tree. Now, most of you will remember that if we have someone arrested, they have to be read their rights, okay? Or the other term is they are Mirandized. And this comes from a case called Miranda versus Arizona in 1966. Miranda was arrested for a murder. Ultimately, in police custody, he signs a confession, which he said he gave voluntarily, or at least that's what the paper said. But it turned out nobody told him his constitutional right to have counsel. Very, very clear right. And so ultimately his confession was voided. Now, it turns out later on he was brought back and convicted on other grounds. But the fact is, he had to be told that he had a right to an attorney. He can waive the right, he can go on. But the key that comes out of Miranda is a doctrine called the fruit of the poisonous tree. The confession was coerced. It was obtained in a corrupt manner and therefore has to be thrown away. And as we look at things, David Rivkin wrote a wonderful piece in the Wall Street Journal not long ago. And the real history that's of interest starts in 1973, U.S. v. Russell. And it says, quote, "We may someday be presented with a situation in which the conduct of law enforcement agents is so outrageous that due process principles would absolutely bar the government from invoking judicial processes to obtain a conviction." End quote. That's a big mouthful. In other words, if the law enforcement people do things corruptly, forget it. Nothing counts afterwards. A year later, in Young v. U.S., it came up, but the real key starts to come up in Williams v. Pennsylvania in 2016. And the Supreme Court there held that a state judge's potential bias violated due process because he had played a role 25 years before. 25 years before. In prosecuting the death row inmate who had petitioned the court for what's called habeas corpus, a hearing. And what they said was that the passage of time and involvement of others do not vitiate, that is, they do not weaken the taint, but heighten the need for objective rules preventing the operation of bias that might otherwise be obscured. A single biased individual, now listen to this very carefully, a single biased individual, quote, might still have an influence that, while not so visible, is nevertheless significant, close quote. The Supreme Court has already ruled. They just haven't put the names on it. That Peter Strzok and Lisa Page and, Bruce Orr, and run the list of all of these people, Jim Comey, they all operated out of extreme animus toward Donald Trump. That means the entire investigation is tainted. It is, by action of law, the fruit of the poisonous tree. And should anyone come up, they could argue that. Now, let's look at a couple of cases. We have George Papadopoulos, whose only reason for even being questioned in this is because of FISA warrants that came out of animus. That means the search warrant that turned him up was invalid, And therefore, anything that came afterwards is invalid. And the bottom line is, if his attorney has any brass ones, he will go to the court and say, we withdraw the guilty plea, and we are asking this court to vacate the charge. That is, to get rid of it with prejudice. That is, so that it cannot ever be raised again. Same thing for General Flynn. He should go back and say, I withdraw the plea, and I'm asking the court to throw it all out based on the fruit of the poisonous tree. So we've got an opportunity for this to happen. And it's beginning to look like, with all of the stuff that's coming out in the news, that we really are shortly going to see Mueller kind of run for the bushes and put a report out that says, nothing to see here. It's all done, because it's becoming very clear that the entire investigation was tainted from the very beginning. Now, on this, with the Russia investigation, there is far too much for us to follow on a weekly bit. Sean Hannity does some good work on it, but if you're going to go online, I recommend 3 reporters. First one is Sarah Carter, outstanding. John Solomon, also outstanding. And then Andrew McCarthy, who also happens to be a former federal prosecutor. So he talks about the legal stuff. Then other legal experts who will opine on bits and pieces as we go along there are 3 very good ones. With Fox News, you have Andrew Napolitano. He is good beyond belief. His work is absolutely textualist, and there are times when I've been mad at him, but the fact is he was following the law very carefully. Another one is Jonathan Turley. Now, Jonathan Turley is a very well-known liberal legal scholar, but he is a brilliant analyst. And there have been a number of times I've seen him very carefully take apart things in a manner that makes the Democrat case look horrible. And what did he do? He was faithful to the law, just the way Kavanaugh will be. And then finally, Alan Dershowitz, who is professor emeritus of law at Harvard, Jewish lawyer. He voted for Hillary, but boy, has he taken apart this Russia investigation. There's just too much out there. Follow him as well. All right, let me take a moment. I'll read your notes and let's see what we've got going on. Little with RGB Sessions. FISA warrants. Okay, so the FISA warrants were sworn on unverified partisan dossier, and this is fruit of the poisonous tree. It's only part of the fruit of the poisonous tree. It's one element that shows how partisan this was, and that it had nothing to do with the law. I hope the president refuses to answer unrelated collusion questions. Count on it. He won't answer any. It's not going to happen. Joe DeGeneva is also very good, and Victoria Tunsing, his wife. You just don't see them nearly as much. Okay, first question that popped up, why did Nike choose Colin Kaepernick? The reporting I've seen on this is pretty straightforward. They had a huge contract with him. They wanted to get some of their money back. You know, they didn't want to just dump $2 million to him, so why not put him in some ads? They also figured that a lot of the audience is the stereotypical ghetto black kid growing up playing basketball, playing football, whatever. And because those people are the ones who, in their eyes, are more likely to want to spend $200 on Air Jordans or whatever else is out there with the Nike brand, they figured that they're not going to lose as much market with that as the NFL is. And one note on the NFL doesn't understand its market. It is a sports franchise, and sports nuts, by and large, love winners. Absolutely love winners. They love competitors, and they want their players to be the best they can be. In other words, it is the ultimate merit system. It is completely non-racial, non-political. Were you the best cornerback? Richard Sherman was for a year. Were you the best quarterback? Well, we know who to talk about there out of Boston. And, you can run the list. So the key there is that's merit-based. And what the league did was look at this, we're going to be social justice people, and forgot that most of their fan base are not social justice warriors. Most of their fan base are true Americans who believe in American exceptionalism and want their sports heroes to be exceptional. They want Gronk. They want Brady, or you love to hate them. You want their opponent to win, that kind of a thing. I must admit, I don't care much for Brady, but that's just personal. But he's proved to be the best. Position on relationship between Trump and Sessions. This is a very real question mark in my mind. And I would suggest that all of you go to Twitter and look up a gentleman named Thomas Victor, Wictor. He is a very astute observer, and he will do Twitter threads that may be as long as 25 or 30 posts in a thread. And so you pop up, open the thread and read the whole discussion. One of the things he points out about Trump, and I've pointed it out in the past, that Trump's favorite book is The Art of War. When he wrote The Art of the Deal, essentially it was the art of war applied to business. And you look at what he's doing in DC. He's getting a lot done. He's dangling shiny objects in front of people. Oh, look at what I've got here. Well, he's off over here doing something big that you aren't noticing and you're not reporting on. For example, look at all the regulations we've gotten rid of that are allowing business to get into business. And so one has to remember this as you look at the Trump and Sessions back and forth. If I were Sessions and I were on the outs with Trump and I got all of this crap, after about the third time, I would send up my letter of resignation and say, have a nice day. I don't need this. Sessions is a Southern gentleman. He is also well regarded as a prosecutor. You'd never wanted to go into court against him because you might as well put on the handcuffs. It's over. And News Today reported by Sarah Carter, remember that name, is that there are several grand juries meeting and discussing various aspects around the Russia probe and around Hillary's stuff. So it looks like there are some things about to be happening. There are several attorneys. For example, we knew about Huber in Salt Lake City, but you've also got a federal attorney in DC. You've got another one somewhere else, and they're all really working hard. Plus, you hear this noise. Trump's been making a lot of noise on Twitter about declassifying the FISA warrants. Any of you remember the term October surprise? Oh, yeah. It's September 6th. Maybe I'll have to do this soon. What happens if he declassifies it on October the 1st? There's going to be hell to pay because all of the Democrat stuff is going to be shown to be fraudulent. And that's going to be very interesting. Comment on Lindsey Graham military court for civilians, executions. I don't know where that comes from. Yeah, Rick says Trump and Sessions are running Shakespearean theater. It makes perfect sense. It really does. Although it's frustrating to watch it and not know that it's theater. Sarah Carter believes Rosenstein's being investigated for FISA abuse. Is it true he can't sign a FISA warrant? Actually, he can, until such time as the investigation actually develops evidence of wrongdoing that is presented further. The question is, who's going to get it? Sessions may have to unrecuse himself to get it. It would be a difficult circumstance. But while you have a pendency, for example, go back and look at Richard Nixon. He was being investigated under the Watergate stuff. He was still president. He could do anything he wanted as president. Rosenstein, same story. He is still deputy director of the deputy attorney general, and he still holds that office, runs that office, does all the job until such time as something comes up to slap him square in the face, and then he's out. Can I ban spammers in the chat? I simply don't know how we do that. Let's see. I changed it to top chat. That doesn't seem to be working here. Okay. Remove. Okay. I got one of them out. That may make life a little better for you. Okay. Any other questions? See, I'm just learning my way along. I just learned this evening how to tweet out the actual link. Do we have any other questions that are hot topics for people? Rosenstein is out of a job when the special counsel ends. Entirely possible. Again, that's part of the art of war. And it may very well be that Trump is holding him there because it serves Trump's purposes until Mueller is done. All right. Well, we are a couple of minutes shy of the original planned time. Alex Jones and free speech. Okay, let me hit that real quick. The problem you've got is Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And basically what it says is that any publisher on a platform like Twitter, Facebook, whatever, and I've forgotten how the wording works, basically cannot be held liable for the things that people say on that platform. Well, they're using that plus the First Amendment, freedom of the press, to become publishers rather than neutral public forums. That leaves you with some real legal issues of, can you do anything? And I've had my personal constitutional law scholars suggest to me that there's really not much you can do. I suggested several weeks ago the possibility of antitrust prosecution, and suddenly that has found its way up into D.C. I don't know if somebody was listening to me or if great minds think alike. But the problem we've got there is that they are looking really, really bad. Now, if someone else is willing to ante up the money to put up a true neutral public forum where they publish their rules, which basically says you can't libel somebody, you can't slander anybody, and anything that would be regarded as illegal speech in the sense of incitement to riot and so on is banned. Otherwise, you speak. We may put a little flag up in the corner of a post that says we think it's violent or whatever, but that would be all we do. You just put for example, as I look at my screen here for the YouTube live, there's a little flag over in the corner. It's a little red thing with white lettering. It says live. They might put something like that up. But if you had a truly neutral public forum, it probably would push Twitter and Facebook out of operation. Google's a little different question, and we just have to see how that develops. I don't have any real solid answers on it. It doesn't look like there are any. Yeah, military tribunals for citizens. I think that is a completely stupid idea. It's one of many that I think that Gramnesty has had in the past. He's good on some things and
he and Marco Rubio, who is one of my senators, are proving themselves to be less than worthy. Hope they prosecute McCabe for lying. He's already been referred for it. Yeah, AJ permanently banned on Twitter. I didn't know about the Alex Jones being permanently banned. I knew he'd been suspended. I saw that. But once again, the legal remedies, they're not very good ones. There is a case coming out of California based on deprivation of livelihood where and I think it was a Facebook account, was making on the order of $100,000 a month. And suddenly, because they were conservative, they were shut down without notice, without anything. And it's basically, if you will, a breach of contract type action, and could very well work as a model to shut some of these people down. You know, Twitter and Facebook are bad actors on this. They don't like conservatives, and it's well established that if all that's out there is liberal, you're going to shift some votes over that way. Okay, last little bit here. Blue wave or red wave in November. Remember that all of the polls had Trump losing badly 2 years ago. Instead, he won where it counted. I mean, I live in a district where we have a very likely red pickup in the House. I live in a state where there's a very likely red pickup in the Senate. Bill Nelson, who's been a big, nice, soft, gentle nothing for decades, is likely to get retired. He's in his 70s. He should be. And Stephanie Murphy hopefully will lose come November. Other places, remember, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. And the question is, how well are the local candidates going to hang Nancy Pelosi and Maxine Waters around their necks? Because those are the people who have guaranteed that if they get in power, they're going to take away the tax cuts, take away the crumbs. It really depends on local issues. I firmly believe that we will increase our hold on the Senate, minimum of 3 seats. It would be really cool if we ran the table on the, 7 or 9 seats that Trump won by big margins that the Democrats are trying to defend. That'd be real nice. Of course, if we do that, there's a pretty good chance we pick up seats in the House. So a wave, I wish I could predict well. If I did, I'd be a millionaire. So, yeah, push polls. One of the big things that happens in polling is that you end up with polls that are constructed in a manner to get the answer they want. You have a lot of people who, we're going to get an extra 10% of Democrats. Well, guess what? There's a big difference between the left and the right. The people on the right, by and large, are too busy working to sit down and protest and take polls. So that immediately skews most of the polls. So I would suggest that polling is a real tough sled these days, particularly with cell phones, with internet, and people just not wanting to be part of that. So I would be very cautious about reading very much into the polls. My hope is a red wave, likely Senate pickup, House, some could go either way, hard to say. If Trump stumps for House candidates at risk, we'll hold the House. I think that's quite likely true. At any rate, we've used up a half hour. And if you want to send subjects for next week, send them through the comments on this video. You can send them to me, tnoel@vidzette.com. I'll see that email. And until next time, I appreciate you watching. I'm Dr. Ted Noel, and hopefully next Thursday, I'll see you from Oregon.